We're going to learn how to solve basic quadratic equations. Notice that the first example has x squared equals 64. In order to solve for x, we're going to take the square root on both sides. And the square root of x squared is just x. And then the square root of 64 is going to be plus or minus 8. And the reason why that we want to use minus 8, okay, minus 8 and plus 8 is that when we plug it into the equation, okay, let's say you had 8 squared, and that has to equal 64, right? So 8 squared equals 64, and that works. But you can also have negative 8 squared to give me 64. So both of these would work, positive and negative 8. So those are your two solutions for the problem. Okay? Second example is the same thing. We're going to take the square root on both sides. And this is going to be broken down into two separate radicals. First of all, the square root of x squared is just x. And then here I'm going to use 4 and 6. Okay? So, and remember when we take the square root of 24, which is equal to the product of square root of 4 times the square root of 6, I am going to write plus or minus. So I'm going to do that now so I don't forget. So the square root of 4 is 2 times the square root of 6 is just 2 radical 6. We don't multiply a number outside the radical with a number inside. Okay? And those will be my two solutions. All right? Another example. Same thing applies here. We're going to take the square root on both sides. And when we do that, this falls under the radical. Square root of 25 is plus or minus 5. All right? And then we can write this as x plus 1 equals 5. And x plus 1 equals a minus 5. We can write two separate equations so we don't get confused. All right? And we're going to solve this one by subtracting 1, I mean. So then you got 5 minus 1 is 4. And then here, we're going to subtract 1 again. And that's going to give me x equals a minus 6. So just separate them into two equations when we get this situation so it's not confusing, because we have to move the 1 over on the right side. Okay? All right? And we can do another one. Again, we're going to have to take the square root on both sides. This falls under the radical. This is going to be a plus or minus this, and we can break it down into separate radicals. Square root of 4 is 2, and the square root of 9 is 3. And then we can write it in two separate equations as plus 2/3, and then we can write x minus 5 equals negative 2/3. Whoops. Okay, so when I go ahead and add the 5 over to this side, then I just do my arithmetic here. This is going to give me x equals, and then again, when you do that, just kind of keep in mind you're doing 2/3 plus 5/1. Common denominator is 3, so I'm going to multiply the right side by 3. And that gives me 2/3 plus 15/3, which gives me 17/3. Okay? And then here I do the same thing. I'm going to add 5. So then I just have x equals, and I just do the math up here. Okay, negative 2/3 plus 5/1. Again, the common denominator is still 3, so I'm going to multiply that whole right side by 3. Whoops, can't seem to write today. And that's going to equal negative 17 plus 15 is 13/3. So those are my two solutions. All right, let's do another one. Okay, so I'm going to immediately square both. I'm going to take the square root on both sides. And when I do that, this is just going to be x minus 4 equals, again, it's plus or minus the square root of 7, because I really can't simplify the square root of 7. It's going to be a decimal, and I don't want to get a decimal unless you want an exact answer. So then I'm going to write this as x minus 4 equals square root of 7. And I'm going to write this as x minus 4 equals minus the square root of 7. Okay? Just separate them into two equations, one for plus, one for minus. And then here I'm going to just add 4 to both sides. And that's just going to give me x equals 4 plus the square root of 7. Here I'm going to add 4 to both sides. And that's just going to give me x equals 4 minus the square root of 7. And those are my two solutions. All right, let's do another one. Okay, so we're going to take the square root, 4x plus 7 squared, and take the square root on that side. So again, when you take the square root on the left, just write whatever's under the radical. And this is going to be plus or minus the square root of 3. And then now we want to separate, we want to solve for the x term alone, right? We need to solve for this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract 7 on both sides. So then I'm just going to write 4x equals, and then this I'm going to write as minus 7 plus or minus square root of 3. Write the minus 7 before the radical and before the plus or minus sign. And then I don't want 4x, I want just x. So I'm going to divide this whole thing by 4. So that this cancels. And then that would be your answer. Negative 7 plus or minus the square root of 3 divided by 4. Okay, so we'll do one last one. And for this particular example, we want to divide out the 3, okay? So we want to get that x squared term by itself, so we can go ahead and divide that coefficient of 3. 48 divided by 3 is just going to be 16. And then we can proceed by taking the square root of x squared equals the square root of 16. Square root of x squared is just x. This is going to be plus or minus 4. Okay? So that one was pretty easy. Just divide the coefficient and then take the square root of both sides, and then you'll get your solution. Okay, I hope this video was helpful in solving basic quadratic equations using the square root method.